Hello, witchy people. You may be wondering why I'm sat here in the dark with nothing but a cup of coffee, a solitary lit candle, and a snoring dog to keep me company. Well, many years ago, I used to run a website called The Haunted ChaCha. And on that site, I would write down the tales that people had told me, not necessarily ghost stories, just tales of strange happenings, weird goings on in strange places, eerie places, places that were supposedly haunted, maybe. So if you want to hear a few, grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and I'll tell you some. I've told you the story of my friend Will's, who, because of a ghostly experience he had in Kent, decided to move away from there and come to Southampton. He didn't always think that was such a good idea, and one of those times he didn't think it was a good idea was the time I'm about to tell you. Will's and his good friend Dan were trying to impress two young ladies they were dating. And in order to impress them, rather stupidly, as a lot of young men do, they decided to take Will's car and drive it to a place near to Royal Victoria Country Park, where it was really dark. There were no street lamps, and try to freak them out a little bit. The place is actually very, very close by to an old police training ground, though whether that has anything to do with what happened, I have no idea. In Royal Victoria Country Park itself, there are the remains of the chapel of one of the largest military hospitals ever built. That may have something to do with what happened. Wills and Dan drove their car up to a secluded little spot. It was so dark, and all the car headlights could pick out was the beginning of a little avenue with trees, quite dense trees on one side, and a big, heavy wooden gate, like a farm gate, that they had to open. Wills and Dan got out of the car, opened up the gate, got back in the car, and started to drive forward. No sooner had their back wheels went over the gateway, the car engine just cut out. The car was completely dead. There were no headlamps, no engine, nothing. The radio went dead. Of course, Wills and Dan, trying to impress the young ladies still, decided the best thing to do would be to toss a coin to see who would get out of the car and look at the engine in the pitch black. Dan lost the coin toss, which was okay because, they were both mechanics, but Dan was the better mechanic anyway. He took the torch out of the glove compartment and went outside to check the engine. The girl he was dating with at the time also went with him, because that's what silly girls who are rather fond of silly boys do. They popped the hood, turned the torch on to look at the engine, and the torch shone brightly for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and then slowly faded out, just dimmed and went to nothing. Now Dan knew that they were new batteries in that torch. It was something that Wills was kind of a bit fussy about, shall we say. He always had a first aid kit, a spare wheel, a spare tyre, a packet of batteries, a torch with fresh batteries in it. He was really careful about these things. But this torch just died, like the car engine, the radio and the headlights. Dan was shaking the torch and said to Wills, "Get me some more batteries. These are gone." They put batteries back into the torch, new batteries, turned it on, and exactly the same thing happened again. It shone brightly for 2 or 3 seconds, and then dimmed and faded to nothing. It was this time then that Dan's girlfriend, who was feeling a little bit freaked out, was looking around and said, "Oh, let's not worry too much. I can see someone in the distance." As they were quite close to the Royal Victoria Country Park, even though it was pitch black at night, they figured it was probably a dog walker out there with a torch and their dog. And so they called over. There was no reply, just this dim orange light slowly coming towards them. They could hear no footsteps. They could hear nothing. And that was kind of when Wills realised that it was deathly, deathly quiet. Dan shouted again, but his voice didn't seem to carry at all. Everything was muffled. Still the light came closer. And Dan's girlfriend sort of realised then that, well, the light wasn't a bright torchlight that you'd expect. It was an orangey sort of coloured light, like a candle. Still the torchlight came closer. Still no one replied when Dan or Wills or the girls shouted out. The torchlight must have been maybe 30 foot away. It was hard to tell in the dark when they realised that it was an old lantern type of torch. So it was candlelight, which was strange to say the least. But what's more strange was that the light from this torch, this lantern, was picking out some of the trees around it, vaguely, just gently. And yet it wasn't picking out the person carrying the lantern. Still the light came closer and closer. Dan took a few steps towards the light to see if he could see who was carrying it. There was no one. There was just a lantern light coming closer, swaying gently, with apparently not a single person there holding the light. Dean slammed down the hood of the car. He jumped into the back seat with his girlfriend and just screamed at Wills, "Start the engine! Start the damn engine!" Nothing. Wills was turning the key and trying so desperately to get this car started, but nothing. There was only one thing to do. In desperation, Dan and Wills would have to get out of the car and start to push it whilst one of the girls was in the driver's seat directing it in reverse. So that's what they did. Dan and Wills were out of the car, swearing like you would not believe. It hadn't been so dark, you could have seen the air turn blue with such language. They started trying to push the car backwards, making sure that it was in the proper gear and screaming at the girls. And still the light came closer and closer, and the closer it came, the more apparent it was that there truly was nobody holding this lantern. The car inched backwards, away from the light, but so slowly. The second those front wheels were past the gate, you've guessed it, the engine sparked back to life. The headlights came on, and the headlights lit up in front of them. And there was nothing. No lantern, no light, no person, nothing. Just a dark, empty road, lined with trees. Dan and Wills jumped back in the car and drove like bats out of hell. I don't think they've been back there since either.